Hello, class.
Hi.
Thank you for coming today to be a part of this lesson. We're going to be talking about cognitive behavior therapy for children experiencing grief and loss. So I know we are all familiar with the mass shootings that has gone on all over our nations. The thing is, most of the times when they happen, they're either in an environment where they're mostly teenagers or adults. But how many of you remember the Sandy Hook shooting? Yeah, that was a little different because we experienced firsthand the effects of children having to experience death and loss. And, you know, if you can imagine, a parent would never want any child of any age to experience that. But imagine children who, you know, are snaggletooth, having to see their friend die and having to deal with that afterwards. So today we're going to deal with just how children may process grief and loss and the things that we can offer during their therapy. During this class, be very comfortable. Feel free to give whatever thoughts you have. Our goal here is to explore our experiences and our thoughts. There's no such thing as a wrong answer. There's no such thing as a crazy thought. So I want you to feel comfortable, and we'll get on with the lesson.
All right.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to preview is a video called Grief Through a Child's Eye. So this will give us a little head start on our lesson for today.
I'm here to honor my mom.
I'm here to honor my dad.
I'm here to honor my stepdad and my granny.
The main mission of Camp Aloha has always been to reach children who have had losses of various kinds and to help them come together in such a way that they find that their grief is normalized. Our children come to us having experienced losses of all kinds. Many of our kids have come to us through our hospice families and have experienced their loved ones dying from cancer or other what we might consider to be natural causes.
I am here to honor my grandma. My grandma, she died from cancer. I wanted her to know that I'm okay without her, but I'm not at the same time. I'll start crying because I'll say, my little brother won't know my grandma. And then now every time I hold him up to a picture of my grandma, he'll reach for it. Her name starts with N and he'll go,
My best friend, Jonathan, fell into the river. And I promised that he couldn't get out. Grieving, people deal with it different ways, you know. You know, want to talk to people and everything, and it make it way better. The big moment at camp is the campfire. So what happens is the children, prior to camp, they write a letter to their loved one, and they get to send their letter to their loved one through the fire.
My brother always wanted to fish with me, and before he died, I wanted to, but since he died, I can't do it anymore.
My papa died on his birthday.
Hospice care is so vital in end-of-life issues. If we acknowledge it and honor it and talk about it and allow it to happen naturally, then people will process much better.
It's been pretty hard, but I stay strong because life is about hello and life is about goodbye.
Okay, so what are some of the visual cues you all saw in the video that displayed grief in the children?
Sad faces, tears.
I don't know if it was a visual cue, but it was a word cue, word honor.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, especially with kids that age, because how can you make connections with death if you never experienced? So I like how they use the word honor and make it
you all think we should categorize grief? Like, is there such thing as, this child deserves to grieve in this way versus this child? Do you think we should categorize that?
I think grief is so, grief is general, but the way people experience it is so personal. So I think it really depends on each child, how they react.
I agree. I think we should be open to each child responding differently. Like I say, grief is, everybody goes through it, but the responses can be very broad. So one child might need hugs or something like that. Another child might need to talk it out. Another child might need to use something else to kind of deal. So gotta be open to each child's individual and then face it.
So one thing I know with people who tend to work with children or do a lot of things with children, you're around them a lot, and so you're able to see a child that may have a bad day. How do we distinguish between a bad day and a child that's grieving? What do you think are things that we would see in a child that's grieving?
You gotta know your child. You gotta know your student.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you can know their response. So I've known we had a child who had a friend to get shot and killed. Normally he has off days, he had a bad day in school. It's more so attitude or something. This time he was just quiet, which is, you can see variations, but just knowing his personality, I could tell, okay, this is something's happened versus like, it was just off day, let's talk it through versus, hey man, what's really going on? So I think knowing the kids is what's big.
And kind of piggybacking off of what he said about knowing the children, knowing different triggers and different things that when you know that child, that there are certain things that you see or hear that would trigger a thought about what they went through, and knowing that when you hear or see that, knowing that it hit them too, and knowing to go to them or give them their space, whatever that different category may be that helps them through that situation.
I think it's a really good point that you guys brought up about knowing your children. That's very important. For those situations that you don't know a child very well, what are some things if a child walked in and you know that they've experienced death, but you don't know how serious it is? What are some natural things that you would do to kind of gauge?
I would probably sit down and just have a conversation with them, just try to engage them and just talk like normal, but just to kind of see what they come out with. Because a lot of times if they feel like they can just chit chat with you, it will eventually come out, even if they don't come out and say everything right up front.
And that's how it is in most cases. If you get a child and you just start to have a basic conversation, they kind of open up to you, even if they don't know you. So that's what I've got from my experience.
The trust is really big key. So just a general conversation. Hey, how you doing? My name is so-and-so. So glad to meet you. And those types of things. And once they kind of, from every interaction, then you prove yourself to really, really care, they begin to open and reveal whatever else along the way. It might not happen right then. It might be down the road, but it's okay. So, yeah.
So today in our discussion, what we want to do is to be able to identify children who may be grieving, and once we identify them, to determine what type of grief they're experiencing. There's something called the SUDS, and you'll learn about that in just a minute when we go through this PowerPoint, but it's a document that you should have on your in your packet, so if you can pull that out. Subjective units of distress, as well as the grief. Okay, so we're going to go through this PowerPoint, and okay, so with the first slide, what is cognitive behavioral therapy? Okay, so cognitive behavioral therapy is a common type of talk therapy. It's basically having discussions with someone that you work with, as well as like a mental health counselor, a psychotherapist, or anybody like that. They develop tools so that you can, let me pull this back. They develop tools so that you are able to get into the cycle. If you all notice here, you have thoughts create feelings, feelings create behavior, and behavior reinforces thoughts. So with cognitive behavioral therapy, the therapist tries to get into their thoughts and help the patient restructure their thoughts so that it can affect their feelings, which will affect their behavior. So that's the whole explanation, kind of a brief explanation of cognitive behavioral therapy. The goal of that is to help the patient or the client restructure their thoughts so that if they are dealing with death, then instead of feeling guilty about the death, how can we celebrate the life of the person? And to kind of help them look at those things in a different perspective. Okay, and there are some mental health disorders that are usually associated with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as they call it sometimes. Anything from depression to anxiety disorders, phobias, PTSD, sleep disorders, eating disorders, and all kind of things. So cognitive behavior disorder is a very popular tool for therapy. Okay, so now let's look at the stages of grief. So starting at the top, and these stages are also found in adults, and there's actually, we're going with the more traditional set of stages, which is 5, but there is actually one, if you want to look it up later, that has 7 stages of grief, where they've added a few things. But with the stages of grief, we start with denial. That's just simply trying to wrap your mind around it. You know, for somebody really close to you, sometimes it's hard to just accept it off the, at the beginning initially. After that, you feel angry because the person is not in your life anymore. You may feel angry toward them for leaving you. You may feel angry towards yourself or other people. Bargaining. You try to figure out if there's anything that you can do to change it or to make this person come back. And all people experience this, adults and children. From there, once you realize there's nothing that can be done, there's usually depression. And that's when you feel really sad because you realize nothing can be done at that point. And then eventually, we come to acceptance. We accept it. Now, it's not, there's no time frame on this. Some people go through these stages within the next few months. It takes some people up to 4 years or even longer to go through these stages. It just depends on the person, the death, and all those other factors. Okay, let's look at the subjective units of distress. This is a tool that we'll use in one of our goals for today. It is to be able to identify where a child ranks in this. And so in this particular tool, we have the explanation, but we also have a visual cue, because sometimes that's helpful for children to be able to say, I feel like this smiley face looks, instead of being able to understand and interpret the text. So that's basically what it is. So if you notice at the top, at the bottom, it's very happy, feeling very, very relieved and happy and no anxiety of any kind. And as it escalates to the top, you feel unbearably bad. So at some points, and we can discuss this later, but at some points, we're okay with children feeling like this because it's normal. Where we get concerned is when it escalates up here. And they feel like they don't want to live anymore, different things like that. So this tool will be very helpful when we look at our case studies. Okay, so what we will do today is something called a treatment plan options. So as we talked about talk therapy, which is what we do as counselors, we also have talked about distinguishing the grief from trauma, a child that is grieving versus a child that has experienced a traumatic event. And we have addressed guilt about that. Now what I'd like for you to do is to pair up. We're going to do something called Think, Pair, Share. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about, I'm going to show you 3 case studies. And these case studies may be very familiar to you. What you're going to do is you and your partner are going to choose one of the 3. And that's going to be your case study. So that's how we're going to do our activity. This activity is called Think, Pair, Share. That's basically when you group with each other and you have solid discussion about your case study. There is a treatment plan, so you will use your tools that we just discussed, the grieving process, as well as the subjective unit of distress. You'll use those 2, and as well as the discussions that we've had, and you will talk with your partner about the treatment plan. Now, what you will have to do is the partner will be a child and the other partner will be the therapist. And that's how we will go through this process. Okay, so we'll start with our first case study. This may be familiar to some of you. Okay, so that's the first one. Does anybody know what movie that's from?
My Girl.
My Girl. And so, if you all remember, her best friend passed away from a bee attack. He was allergic to them. What are some things that you saw that are pretty obvious, but what are some things you saw in this movie to let you know that she's grieving?
Her outbursts. Like I don't want to say she hasn't been taught how to grieve, but she wasn't able to correctly express how to grieve, if that even makes sense. And if you remember in the movie, her mom is dead too. And I think from that point, she was never told how she should grieve. So when Thomas Jays dies, it's just an explosion of emotion, which is interesting to see.
And kind of a split between a little bit of denial as well, with making the statements about his glasses and different things like that. Like things should be normal. He should look normal when things really aren't normal. Right now,
He wanted to go climbing trees. You know, asking if he wants to climb a tree.
It's like it just really hit her. Like she just got it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at both of our tools. Okay. Let's look at the subjective units of distress. What would you assign to the character data?
She got a spectrum going on.
Right.
Definitely denial from the stages of grief. But it's more than that.
So we all agree on denial in stages of grief. What type of emoji? If you could only choose 2, what would you assign to her?
Probably 9 and 10.
Right.
Okay. So here's our next. Who hasn't seen that movie?
I've seen the original one and the remake.
Okay. So if we remember, C.C. Bloom was a famous person. They actually grew up knowing each other, but went separate ways, but kept in touch. And as they came back together, they got even more closer as adults. So what ends up happening is Whitney has a daughter after a long, journey with leaving jobs and then her husband leaving her, different things like that. But she has a daughter, and Whitney is diagnosed with an illness that eventually causes her to pass away. And so her daughter's named Tori. She's the child in this scene that deals with the death. So in this scene, in this movie, Tori has a very supportive best friend of her mom. But what are some things that you would consider needs that Tori would have after his death? What are some needs that she would still have?
Probably stability, so that I think because Tori was still acting, she was still acting and things like that. So just some stability while she's still traveling with her. I mean, not Tori, Whitney.
Cece.
Thank you. Cece took care of Tori afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. And what would you consider? I mean, it's almost hard to imagine a person that young losing their parent, But what would you consider to be Tori's level of grief on the Sutts?
At the end of the movie? Or
I would say yes.
Seemed like there was an acceptance at the end. Almost the latter part of the end, an acceptance of, okay, this has happened, this is how we're gonna move forward and accept this, but still know that she's in my heart. And this is someone who has been placed in our lives that we, had time to get to know, and that has been really close to my mother.
Yeah, one thing to remember is acceptance. Just because you are at the level of acceptance doesn't mean it's easy. So that's a mistake that people tend to make. Once they get through that grieving process, there's a pressure of, okay, now that I made it through, I have to pretend that everything is fine. But if you notice at the end of that clip, even though she was at the level of acceptance, there was a tear rolling down her face while she watched her new mommy sing. And so that to me stood out as saying she's accepted it, but she also still feels it. Yeah. So what we're gonna do, if you guys can let me know which movie you want to do, I'll give you a few minutes to check and get your treatment plan going. What movie?
They all matter, right?
What room y'all doing?
Ladies first. Okay. Okay. This is Lion King.
Okay.
Lion King.
Like,
So just do we read it and tell us what to do, or?
no, you just go ahead and talk amongst yourself.
Okay. And one of us has to.
The goal is to complete the treatment plans together.
Okay.
One of you are Simba and the other one is Dexter.
Simba. Okay.
is our subject.
For a subject, we just put
So
the
it's
name.
Tori, little girl.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so a child would be.
I could be the child.
Okay.
Do you want to be Tori or you want to be the therapist?
I can be Tori. Be the therapist.
So Lion King tells the story of Simba when young, a young lion who lives in sea served his brother foster the king.
Okay.
Inside of after Simba's maternal uncle, Spartan mother Simba, Simba's manipulated the thinking.
The approximate age, let's see.
Simba has wanted to
Child characters in the case study answer these
like any
questions.
good father, he came to his rescue.
Okay, please answer the questions below. Okay, so her age is 10.
Her sub score is going to be. So we talked about. Let me see.
Where she was
did.
at the end of the movie.
Yeah, she wasn't freaking out. She was pretty much accepting mode. So maybe.
It was hard to tell.
Blue all the time.
So, okay.
So approximate age, how old is he?
He's little, so let's say
He can talk.
they can talk. I wouldn't say a teenager. I was still an age where dad is like superhero.
So 6 or 7.
Yeah.
I feel like he could be 6.
Yeah, let's say 6. I think he's 6 too.
Okay.
And sud score.
Okay. So, so let's go. So you send about.
So we're just pulling from this exact moment.
I'm thinking so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sud score.
So we're pulling from this.
Okay.
Where he feel like it's his fault. I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
So.
Feel happy again. I feel the worst I've ever felt.
Yeah. By the end of the movie, I think she.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think at that time of his dad falling off the cliff, I think it's Probably about a 9. 'Cause
Yeah,
I
I
don't
was
think he
thinking too.
expressed that he wants to die.
Yeah,
I don't
but
think
it's
he got
but it's
that far,
but it's the worst I've ever felt.
Right.
Definitely not.
So a 9.
So the stage of grief. This is it later on definitely comes depression when you're one is off, and it's not denying because he knows his dad is dead.
Right.
If there's anything you can do to change, and it's for a minute, so it's tricky because it's for a minute. He talks to his dad. He's like, "Dad, get up, get up, get up."
Right.
Like he's trying to
So
get
that
him
could
up.
be one. Okay, that's
He
true.
was angry.
That's true. It's like bargaining.
Right.
He's got a lot going on.
He do.
So
So I think it's a mix between bargaining and anger
Right. To what was about to happen.
Right.
at the beginning stages.
Okay.
Because he, throughout the movie, he touches on all of it. He does.
Accepts
So this is bargain / anger.
right towards the end when her mom was still alive. Like, you know,
Grief
they were
or
doing something
trauma?
together, and Cece was trying to show Whitney, and Whitney was like, she just had no trauma with that part. But towards the end,
I think it's when he first. I think it first has to be trauma because it's shock. Because grief is when you let emotions seep in, which he did, but
right.
the trauma of seeing
and
his dad fall off the cliff,
loyalty.
pushed off the cliff.
To one another,
the being
that
self
it
was
would really
traumatic.
help
Right.
for her to be able
I
to
think so. Trauma. I agree.
follow.
He does see
Yeah.
grief a little.
Yeah, cause she, I think at
Or
that
maybe
point she
you know
felt
I
like,
think it is trauma because he doesn't
Cece
know himself
really
to
was
grieve
gonna
properly.
take care of
So I agree.
yeah, I agree with that.
Which he later does.
He later does.
Agree.
Okay.
Treatment plan.
Treatment plan, talk therapy, distinguish grief from trauma, or address guilt.
Angela, can you explain the treatment plan?
Yes, the treatment plan is basically, what you would suggest a therapist would do with that.
Okay.
Gotcha. I have 3 of them. Okay.
So first,
Maybe definitely gonna have to be some discussion.
I think
So
she definitely
conversation.
need talk therapy,
So he's gonna need definitely
just
some.
so that she can
Sometimes just to talk,
express
just to share with his side, what's on his mind. I
That
can
never seemed to fully go.
where he's at with it.
so
But I'm
conversation,
thinking
discussion.
talk therapy.
And I think in the beginning, he probably wouldn't be open to talk. He probably want somebody who can.
Pull it out.
Right.
How they say it, something, intense. Because she seems to have that support
Yeah.
already coming from CC. And so just knowing that you have that outside person who can still continue to talk and work through situations that may not be, because she's still a child,
Right.
that may not be.
Treatment too.
So definitely it's gonna have to be something to deal with the
Just
the
having
youth
that person that
Right. So like, how do you feel?
can still help
the
guide
part where what's his fault? Helping to move past.
Right.
Because either way,
that may come up.
his mind's gonna go. Had I not gone over there, my dad would never come here to say these things.
Also to be able
Versus
to identify.
Scar did that. Once he found out, I think he's gonna deal with that for a while. Even though Scar did kill him, he still went there, which resulted in when his father come to rescue him. So a treatment plan is something that
that therapist
focuses on guilt and not being the his fault,
or seeing them while she's talking.
helping him accept that his father died, helping him accept that maybe his father was murdered. Yeah, even the ugly part of it, and accepted. Yeah.
Accepting the truth.
So just an ongoing talk therapy
Yeah.
would help, throughout the years until you see that there's a good communication about what's happening.
Yeah, so but like accepting the truth, kind of talk.
Nothing
He said his
intense.
father did bad,
Yeah.
his father was actually
Yeah.
murdered, but it's not his fault.
At this point, because she is old enough.
And it's true.
So just
You know what I'm
regular
saying? I
ongoing.
think the big part of the movie is like, I don't know, on the flip side, helping on the positive end of things, realize that, that
She's
he
already-
is his dad, but he's still in line to be king
Right.
because of where he's coming from and what he's come through shows how strong he actually is. He has to do his dad instilled a whole bunch of stuff in him. He's able to fulfill and be that because he comes from royalty and Christ. But he also got things that instilled in him and everything. You know, they were singing from him so young. He still had great at the time. Time with him, so maybe sometimes the time was just
family therapy.
acknowledging maybe
So that would help.
honor his dad, honor his dad, and then also acknowledging what his dad is doing again. So,
And be able to sit in on some of those. Calls. To kind of help, because there may be some times where CC may not understand the situation that she may be going through. For them to sit through,
the responsibility.
therapist kind of navigate what's happening. That would help. That would be helpful, because sometimes there may be a communication barrier.
Right.
Where she may not understand what Tori's going through.
And then the fact that, I mean, you know, they are different.
You have about a minute.
They're different ethnicities, so, you know, Cece may need more awareness of how to deal with her child that is
observations we observed that he did
versus just how to deal with a child dealing with a child who is black and going through grief. And that brings its own level. So Cece may need that kind of support. And Tori might need that support of like, you know, you have a different, now you have a different relationship.
His whole in a way that's
just like it didn't happen.
Even within
Just
your
totally,
own culture.
you know,
You know, and I don't even know what kind of therapy that would be,
There's time to deny
but
it.
that's
Once he turns
real,
his face,
that's real.
he's able to become, to move, to deal with it and move past it.
Well, it's true. No, I think it's part of the
You know,
truth.
what happened. Even if it's true, because the person still think he did, and he fixed that out, then he found out it's true.
Wow, I think you really can't control things.
You know,
when
true.
they get older, but making sure that she's having a healthy relationship.
See, right?
Yeah. That Tori has healthy relationships.
And I don't know if that's like part of the
Yeah.
truth.
He does these questions.
How she deals with it.
That's all this thing. Discuss
Right.
ways that remove description of child. Discuss the ways of child.
Some kind of observation
Yeah, I think
to address
what stage of grief was the child in?
racial differences. So that way, that's something that would probably be addressing for both of them.
Okay, we're gonna take the last few minutes of class and, I'd like for each group to share their findings and what your, recommendations would be for therapy for your particular subject. And, then we'll give the other group the opportunity to do the same. And during this time, be reminded that, you're encouraged to discuss and to explore your thoughts and your experiences. Who would like to go first?
Ladies first.
Okay, so you want us to review who we had? Okay, so we had, the Beaches movie and the case study with Tori. We went over her SUS score being around 3. We couldn't really tell in the long term, you know, how much further than that she was, but at the end, she seemed like she was at about a 2 or a 3. We thought that she was dealing more with grief than with trauma by that point at the end. And for the treatment plans, we had 3 different treatment plans, but the first one was, we just felt like she needed more ongoing talk therapy versus like an intense therapy by the end, just regular. Do you want to go for the next one?
And we also felt like she needed family therapy. Because we know that with her now being with CC, that there are going to be some times where CC may not understand, or there may be a communication barrier there, and then that the therapist can come and talk them through certain situations so they'll be able to understand each other. Because you have to understand that Tori's going to be grieving and CC's going to be grieving too, and sometimes those two may not, so them being able to come together on some certain things and still keep that communication open, it'll help with family therapy.
That's really good. That's a good suggestion.
How important do you guys think it is to consider the different cultures?
We talked about that too.
We did.
We didn't really put that as a treatment plan, but we did put down in the observations that there would definitely need to be an addressing of the racial differences and the cultural differences between the two of them, so that while they're both going through the grief process, that real subject is addressed too.
Right, I agree.
You guys have any comments about that?
I had thought about the family therapy part, but just thinking about the whole dynamic of both their family units. Their family unit now, but both the dynamics of what they see as family has changed. I think the lady was a single mom, right? And then she went from having a mom to just the old, so that makes sense. Because they'll need to know how to learn how to do this together.
Yeah.
She has to learn how to become a parent. She's got to, be open to letting her be a mom, foster mom for her. So I think family therapy is going to be great. It's good to get help for Tori, but I think ultimately family therapy will help the mom get what she needs to be able to support her new daughter.
Our third treatment plan was making sure that she helps Tori to build healthy relationships, because that's going to be key moving forward. She's at a young age, and there's still some things that aren't going to be clear to her, and not having those good relationships can poison, or just not be as healthy. And so making sure that she has that support of building health. She's seen what a healthy relationship is with the two best friends, and so just having that those type relationships will help her in the future with dealing with other things.
Thank you, ladies, for the feedback. Okay, the Lion King.
So we had Lion King, of course, and so we guess his approximate age to be around 6 or like kind of small, because he was at that age where like dad superhero, hey my dad, and dad. So that was really, really big. But we did see that when the part we saw in the clip that we had his SET score to be at about a 9, super high, but not high enough as where he wanted to hurt himself. But just because of he went through something very, very, as what we thought now, the stage of it was going to be more, grief was actually more so trauma versus grief, because he just saw something super traumatic. His dad died in his face. So at that moment, he just saw him fall. I don't even know if it hit yet, if it was his fault or what happened, he just saw it. So that's kind of where he was. And the stage of grief we found was kind of more so in between, we said bargaining and anger, mad and upset that his father died. But if you remember the part where he walks to his dad, get up, Dad, get up. He's kind of still trying to figure out ways that, trying to talk him through this. So just in his young mind, trying to figure out if his dad's really dead. And so that's kind of where we started off with that part. You want to hit the treatment plan?
Sure. So our first treatment, we said it's important for him to have conversation. He's at the age where he's probably not going to do most of the talking, so he needs a counselor or somebody there that can kind of guide him and coach him in his thoughts and feelings. So we felt that was important for the first one. And then for treatment number 2, it says accepting the truth that it wasn't his fault, because he went through the night, and of course his Uncle Scar told him immediately that it was his fault. And you see him go on this path of denial, which we said he touched on all of these stages. So for treatment 3, we said figuring out a way to honor his dad, because of course he is next to Lion King, and with honor his dad, he got a responsibility now. So it's kind of time to put on your big boy pants and try to get through this. So yeah.
Yeah. Almost like it would be cool the therapist could realize who he is and who he's going to be, like at the beginning. So design the plan to ultimately get him to be king. So he is this person, but what can we start from where he is to get him to become, who he's meant to be.
Ladies, do you have thoughts about their case study?
I love the idea of getting him from where he is, dealing with what he's doing, and then getting him to that point of stepping into his role as a king.
Right.
That's big.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much again for being a part of this discussion. The goal here again is that we are able to identify when children are grieving, but also be able to understand where they are in their grief. And then once we're able to understand that, then we can then assign a treatment plan. So you guys had very, very good thoughts, and you contributed a lot to the class. So you guys have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.